Hello everyone, welcome to the third episode of the Tom Talks podcast with myself, Tom Randall. Today's podcast talks about science communication with Alex Kirkpatrick. Our conversation ranges from contemporary problems with communicating science to the general public, the importance of narrative to build rapport and trust between scientists and the public, and light-hearted speculation about artificial intelligence and its potential dystopian future. Alex is a PhD candidate in the field of science communication at Washington State University, and he is also a science communicator and editor at robohub.org, a non-profit organisation in the United Kingdom promoting engagement with the science of robotics and artificial intelligence. The views Alex expresses in this podcast, however, are his own and not of his affiliates. Alex holds a Bachelors of Science with honours in Physics, Astrophysics and Cosmology from Lancaster University, and a Masters of Science in Science Communication from the University of the West of England. I also highly recommend you visit Alex's personal website called superluminalpi.com, with pi spelt P-I. There, you can find a large collection of Alex's academic work, his articles for RoboHub, and some original sci-fi short stories. You can also follow Alex on Twitter at superluminalpi. With all of that, I give you Alex. I'm here with Alex Kirkpatrick. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I suppose then we can talk about general issues in science communication today. So if we were just to, off the top of my head, some of the science communicators that are around at the moment, so maybe Bill Nye or deGrasse Tyson or Richard Dawkins, maybe Lawrence Krauss you could throw in there as well. These are people that are trying to communicate science to the general public, but sometimes I think their message isn't that well received because their message becomes caught up in a political environment. So I know there are a few people that don't listen to Bill Nye because they think he's got a political agenda. Richard Dawkins is demonized as a Islamophobe. I forget the university, but recently he was not allowed to talk because
it was Berkeley again, but it wasn't the university this time. It was a radio station in Berkeley.
Right, and then even with Lawrence Krauss, I mean, he's someone that is obviously very intelligent in his particular field, but even myself, who I want the science communication to succeed, he comes across to me as quite arrogant. I don't think he doesn't talk too well about philosophy. I've seen him a few times say philosophy is becoming irrelevant as science takes over, and that seems to me a bit misguided or misconstrued.
And arrogant. Like, we keep coming back to arrogance, but that's a real problem in science communication because, we live in a cult of personality and entertainment media. So on one hand, like Neil deGrasse Tyson and stuff like that, they're doing what they can for science in the language of the time. They're entertainers, they're personalities. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, he doesn't get involved with politics, but at the end of the day, he's a human being and he has every right to think what he thinks about things, especially, and use his voice how he wants to use his voice. But yeah, on the other hand, there are people that are arrogant in both the political field, but who's the science communicator in England, the Mancunian that everyone loves?
Brian Cox, that's the one.
Oh, look at that star, isn't it beautiful? He also has said some really kind of disparaging things about like philosophy, half tongue in cheek, but it comes from a real place. And having spent a lot of time in physics departments, I can tell you that once there are no non-physicists present, there is this real swell of arrogance that, I don't know, that's kind of augmented almost by things like Big Bang Theory and stuff like that, that now it's okay to be an arrogant arsehole about it and like really kind of dangle your intelligence over other people without stopping to think about the varied myriad of forms of intelligence and stuff like that. And that's one thing that's science communication is trying to, in its basic sense, trying to engage people with science rather than teach them about it. It's not public understanding of science. It's trying to engage. It's trying to draw people in via various means and get them to, familiarize them just with the lexicon sometimes of science, to make science a part of their life, to not make it this separate thing, because science is something you do from the youngest age, when you pick something up and drop it and repeat the experiment, and you figure out that something, God knows what, is pulling stuff downwards. It's something we all do. It is part of our lives. It's not this separate entity. And so half the battle in drawing people in is convincing them that there isn't this cultish organization waiting for them to fill their heads with ideas and push old ideas out of their head. And scientists, in my experience, can be a real problem. There's a lot of them who don't even think they need. They think they can use public money to go around and research the things they research, and then will get annoyed if they have to give a lecture on it, a public lecture, or talk to a journalist about it, or operate in the public sphere. And with that lack of transparency, which is a real issue in science communication, it doesn't build public trust. And without public trust, you don't get public votes, you don't get public money, and also, who the hell are you doing it for?
Absolutely, and it's very dangerous as well, because it's not just in climate change, it's also in vaccines and autism. It's in the food that we eat.
Foot and mouth disease in the 90s, if you remember, in England, and BSE. Like it's affected everyone in every culture at some point. A lack of trust, a lack of communication, and sometimes I think those who do trust science nowadays, because it has got this cultish thing that's kind of rivaling religion at the moment almost, which is a dangerous thing, because science is merely a process of finding out what's true and what's not true. But there's a lot of people who aren't really involved in science that really, they say they really believe in science, and they use that. They say that they believe in science, and it's
a misuse of language almost.
It is, yeah, and I think it's kind of a dangerous one, because it's like you're essentially saying that you have a form of faith in science, that you don't need to question science, when science itself has to question itself. But what we really need is, and this is where philosophy can come in, a critical thinking, logical society. When we say we believe in science, I think what they're saying is, I'm a rational, logical person. I believe, and I believe in rationality and logic.
Yeah.
And those aren't, I mean, they're entrenched in the scientific method, but they're really philosophical ideas.
Well, the scientific method is almost a branch of those themes.
Wheeling back to, is philosophy essential? Then I think more essential probably than it's ever been, because people need to think critically like that. And religiosity is obviously a massive issue standing in the way. And I've got my head in my hands. I'm just thinking, like, what have I got into here?
Yeah. and just to even keep it within, not even philosophy in general, but even just the philosophy of science. I mean, I have heard Krauss a few times just say, it's a pointless endeavour, whatever has philosophy of science done for science. But the whole idea of falsification comes out of the philosophy of science. It comes out of Karl Popper. And so it almost is frustrating to see these are people that have the public domain. These are people that have the Twitter audience. They have people show up to their talks. And if they say that, and as you say, it can become almost a bit cultish if these are the people that almost are the leaders. And as humans, you can't help but follow someone if you like what they say. And if this is someone who's disparaging even the philosophy of science, then it almost undermines their own goals that they're trying to achieve. Anyway, you've set me off there as well.
Yeah, I know. You crying as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to hold back the tears. My glasses have gone a bit foggy.
In defense of science, though, in defense of those people, the public science the entertainment science communications, I call them, they're not the policy makers or the museum artifact designers. I think if you read kind of Neil deGrasse Tyson's Twitter feed and stuff like that, he'll say, and I've heard his podcast as well, and he said a lot of the time he puts stuff out there that he'll say something about the universe or cosmology and immediately be attacked by thousands of people calling into question what he's saying or how he can be so political or whatever. And he's not. All he's done is make a statement of fact about physical science, and people have taken that as a challenge. And I think that's one of the biggest things standing in the way at the minute, because I have no idea. I wasn't an adult in the 80s and 90s, but I can't imagine it was this bad or so sectarian, especially in America. The sectarianism regarding science, philosophy, and religion is the lines are hard drawn that a scientist can't make 25 character statement on Twitter without being leapt upon.
And it's a big issue if on YouTube as well, or say the blogging culture, where you don't have people go through the peer review process. You just put it
Yeah.
out there. On YouTube, there's loads of videos still of people talking about flat Earth theory, or
Yeah.
that the dinosaurs didn't exist really.
Yeah.
That it's all fake. And you get these little, again, you got to be careful that you don't get caught up in your own echo chamber. But this is one where the comments are all tailored to fit the video, and
Yeah.
people go there to reinforce their, I don't know, maybe an initial hunch, and then they get drawn in.
I mean, when you have like college basketball players, or I can't remember, or maybe it was in the NBA, but young man coming out and saying he thinks the world is flat and he sees no evidence for it otherwise, only what the media and the government that he doesn't trust have told him. And then people obviously shout that down, and his teammates come along and say he's allowed his opinion, which is the culture we're living in. Everyone's allowed their opinion. But when it comes to matters of empirical physical science, I'm afraid opinions don't really count when it's a hard and fast fact. But I think people just don't believe facts because they don't believe the institutions or the mediators that give them the facts. Like, they don't believe the world is spherical because who told them and where they got that information from was an organization or a sect of society that they have no trust in,
Yeah.
be it the media, or in his case perhaps, be it the school he went to, or the teacher that tried to tell him. And so trust and engagement is the big thing from an early age, from school, but it should continue, in my opinion, your entire life. Trust is the issue because, yeah, like you say, with flat earthers, climate change deniers, they're not making a comment on science, they're making a comment on scientists, and they're making a comment on the institutions, the gatekeepers of knowledge that trickle down the knowledge to them. They don't trust the gatekeepers. But from a science communication point of view, I really believe, again, to paraphrase kind of Wittgenstein, language is kind of a grid via which we conceptualize the world. So exposing people to the lexicon of science in a positive way would be a really good thing. You need to talk to people on their own level. It's all very well trying to create artifacts to go into a museum to impress people, but the only people walking through the doors of the museum are people that they're often already a won-over audience. It's creating subtle things. It is creating entertainment media. It's writing books. It's normalizing the field-specific lexis of science. It's talking about it much. It's storytelling. I am a massive believer in the power of narrative, not only because that's how humans have communicated to one another, through song, through story, through fiction. It's similarly, people need exposing to the scientific lexis, or scientists need to come out of their bubble and expose themselves to the lexis of narrative. They need to learn to tell stories. I think storytelling events are a great thing that turn up and people tell stories about their lives. And this is what I'd like to do with a podcast potentially. Is have them tell stories of their life, or specific stories, narrative, temporal sequences of events, science fiction, science in fiction, all sorts of things. I think narrative and language is the key to everything.
I think that's definitely a great way to do it, because I mean, it's almost ingrained into us as humans that the verbal or the spoken word, the stories, have been around for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
It's only really in the past, say, 500 years where most people are able to write and to read.
But before that, they'd sit by a fire, and that's how knowledge was passed down from one generation to the other, via stories. Often stories that have been debunked, like Thor didn't actually create the lightning. But these stories and these ways of understanding the universe were extraordinarily powerful for an extraordinarily long period of time. I mean, I'm sure there are people around the world that still believe in a lot of pagan kind of gods and rituals, and you see people still read their star signs and astrology and things like that. There's a powerful impulse to believe in stories, and you don't need to read, and you don't need to be that smart. It's just people believe in the stories they're exposed to at a young age. It can be difficult to come out of a religion if you've been religious as a young person, because they're so deeply ingrained in your psychology and the way in which you perceive the world and your cosmos. And so, yeah, storytelling can be as simple as just a story about science, sitting down, talking about it.
At this point, Alex, I think we should probably give a concrete example of where science communication needs more work. And one area you've been focusing on is how to communicate the field of artificial intelligence to the general public.
Yeah.
So there does initially seem to be a disparity between what the public interprets as artificial intelligence and what artificial intelligence actually is. So I wonder if you could first provide a rough outline of what artificial intelligence is.
Artificial intelligence is programmed. It's code. It has an external inputter, a computer programmer that writes the code, writes the behavior, and then at the moment an artificial intelligence springs into life and adheres to the mathematical algorithms that were written for it. So in that way it's fenced. What you're kind of suggesting is an artificial super intelligence that can spring consciousness beyond its own programming. So that is machine learning, where it has this primordial code that is switched on by its godlike creator, John down at IBM. Then after John's gone for a coffee, this thing can break beyond its fences, if you like, break out of its firewall or whatever, and learn from what's going on. It can learn from its own mistakes and adjust its own code accordingly. And I guess this is what Elon Musk is kind of getting at when he's saying that we should legislate for artificial intelligence now, even though we don't have a kind of super intelligence, because he believes that once we reach a certain level of artificial intelligence, it's inevitable and probably won't be long before that intelligence can learn its way out of its kind of ring-fenced algorithms and write itself new algorithms, and then it'll just be a snowball effect to that computer learning everything it needs to learn in milliseconds and becoming this super consciousness. So at the minute, in the very artificial intelligence is actually pretty basic and not nearly as advanced or all-encompassing or even frightening than the media kind of suggest. I'm not talking about the written media, but I'm talking about things like Westworld or sci-fi and things like that. You can achieve a lot with basic code, and it's really the processing power and the speed of these machines that gives the impression of this kind of unholy intelligence, because they're so fast. But in actual fact, they don't get the most basic of things, of human functions like emotion and things that a baby would. So perhaps not something to fear or legislate for immediately.
So this is that debate that Elon Musk was having with Mark Zuckerberg quite publicly. Was it this week? So Zuckerberg taking the opposite view to Musk then, that it's a positive thing, that it's here to help out humans in a variety of ways. So self-driving cars could be safer, diagnosing better if you've got health problems, those sorts of things. Self-driving cars then, those exist at the moment.
They do. I live in the Bay Area, and they are everywhere at the moment. I'm not sure how many privately owned, but I only live a few miles from both Google and Apple. So,
have you been in a self-driving car?
No, I haven't. No, and I'm not sure how I feel about them purely because I love driving. But eventually, I'm sure driving will go the way of the dodo. I'm pretty positive of it. I'm not sure society has much of a choice. I'm not sure society really knows what's going on. This seems to be driven entirely, if you excuse the pun, by these companies who are trying to make these things, and I don't even know if people want them. I'm not done enough research. I'm not enough asked people. When I ask people about self-driving cars, people that aren't scientists and aren't involved in it. I don't really know anyone that wants one.
I'm sure I read somewhere as well that they were trying to implement them in Australia, but they were having issues because the cars couldn't really see kangaroos properly, so they couldn't judge the distance. So every time the kangaroo jumped, the distance the car thought it was from the kangaroo was skewed. And then when the kangaroo landed back on the ground, it was much closer than the car thought. So
Right.
basic issues of kangaroos going
Well,
on.
this is just the basic kangaroo problem that we all deal with in the sciences, where there comes a terminal point where you just got to ask what if a kangaroo leaps in front of me?
This is probably an issue, though, that you've got people very much unaware of the current state of AI,
Yeah.
perhaps, and perhaps the trajectory that it's going in. Is that a lack of communication? I mean, as a science communicator, is it just a lack of communication, or is there an arrogance on the engineer's part that this is the future and it's coming?
Well, this is my worry with it at the moment because being both a scientist and a science communicator, I'm kind of in that world, and I do worry a little bit because I see what's happened with climate change and things like that. That's just a complete breakdown in communication and in trust and in willingness to trust or willingness to listen between science and the public. And with AI and robotics, it's a completely different side of engineering and science. And this is controversial amongst sort of my colleagues and stuff, but when I interview people about it or I read things from people, I do sense a certain amount of arrogance from the scientific community and the engineering community involved with robotics and AI, in that they're gonna do what they do, and they're gonna try and push the boundaries, and they're just gonna invent and innovate and try and beat each other to the pump. But there doesn't seem to be a lot in the way of actual science communication going on between them and the public. And when you consider of the kind of repercussions of even inventing a great robot arm that can then take 10 jobs in a factory, because that's what's going to happen. Like, people aren't going to be working in factories in like 20-30 years time, and automation is going to impact every area of society. Maybe not now, maybe not even in 50 years, but there will be times when we won't even necessarily need writers and journalists and things like that. I mean, if you can make an algorithm for one thing, you can make an algorithm for another. And there are people working on kind of automating everything. You see secretaries and things like that being automated in their form of kind of basic social robots at the minute, and they're imperfect, and there's nothing to get too excited about at the minute. And this is the argument I hear from the scientists and engineers on that side, that there's nothing to worry about. It's really basic at the minute. It's like, yeah, but it's really basic until it's not. And just telling people, scoffing at people and telling them not to worry about it is a really dangerous way of going about it, because you're putting yourself on a pedestal and you're looking down on people. There are some valid questions that we need to ask, because we're not just sending one guy to the moon here and spending lots of taxpayer money or whatever in the process. We're making decisions about how our grandchildren are even going to exist, how they're going to live, how they're going to get taken care of, how they're going to drive to the shops, who they're going to meet at the shops. They're going to buy anything from the shops, or is just the robot going to bring it from the shops? What are they going to do for a job? One of the biggest concerns is from a psychological standpoint. Imagine a future with the future that they want, with automated cars, automated industry, automated everything, everything at the touch of a button on a computer, or even augmented reality and augmented neural networks where you don't even need to go on a computer. You can just think about what you want. There'll be a format of getting that. Then what is left for a human to do? Or is this literally just the next step in evolution, where we outdo ourselves and just become part of the mainframe? I mean, these questions again, they get me scoffed at, because it's like, well, we're nowhere near that. It's like, yeah, but that's the vector we're along.
There's lots of different things we could touch on there. So maybe to the first thing that I thought of when you were talking about how the machinery that's going to take over various jobs, not just in factories, but as we were saying with self-driving cars, taxi drivers out of a job, or if
Yeah.
you've got a really good teaching algorithm, teachers become defunct, or maybe you'd reach a point where you could just download the information straight to your brain if you're going to go that far
Well,
down
this
the
is it, isn't
trajectory.
it? With the augmented neural networks, you can do that, but you can already see like a lot of teachers being outdone because instead of like 10 teachers to teach 10 classes, a lot of universities now you just need one person who's good at writing the course and popping it online, and that's the way people are learning now.
Yeah, it's all lectures on YouTube, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, exactly. It's lectures on YouTube, but there are universities, even at postgraduate level, offering their courses entirely on the internet.
Yeah, total online courses. And we might say there might be a convincing argument to say that the physical university itself will soon become obsolete if you end up having the recordings available all online for students just to go online and access it. That you can just stay in bed and just
Yeah,
do your degree and just pay for the accreditation.
exactly. When we were growing up, if you got stuck on something in a pub, talking with your friend, one of you'd have to go home and read a book and tell him in 2 days later, like, oh, it means this or it means that. But now you even see these conversations cut off really early. You start them and then midway through, someone just takes out their phone and starts Googling. And we've already usurped kind of human intelligence in that way, that all we needed was one person to write it on Wikipedia and that was it. We've all been equalized as far as that's concerned. And so walking around with a head full of kind of encyclopedic knowledge, it doesn't even matter anymore, to be honest. Short-term memory, long-term memory, when it comes to facts and figures, like Einstein said, why bother, to paraphrase, why bother learning something that you can read in a book? Well, nowadays, why bother learning something you can just Google?
In a second, and that's probably one of the major arguments against AI, isn't it? The downfall of the pub quiz.
This is my only concern, really. But yeah, but luckily on the plus side of that though, some researchers I think at the University of Sheffield, you can go online uh, and see the YouTube. They created a robot arm that pulled the perfect pint. So
Wow. So
swings and roundabouts.
so the pub landlords are going to go out of business then, or at least the workers. And so there is the argument then that there is a need for a minimum income as a result of these incoming robotics, and or whether you need to tax these robotics as well.
Or just free beer and more perfect pint pulling robot arms, to be
Right.
honest. And that's a perfect tableau for what's going to happen. A bunch of people sat in the corner of a pub, not really communicating, on their phones, looking at information that they forget 2 minutes early, and just to keep them silent, the robot arms are pulling perfect pints for them.
Well, even if they make it out to the pub, if you've got these augmented realities that you were saying, like the new virtual
Yeah.
reality headsets that you can put on,
Mm.
they can be very attractive. Especially, I think the demographic is for young men, generation that's been born after 1980, that might find it difficult to get on the housing ladder, might be find it difficult to get a job in a saturated market. And
Yeah.
so a place where you can actually feel or take some responsibility or to feel good about yourself is in a video game where you have total control. Reality just suddenly becomes harsh.
Well, exactly. I mean, virtual reality and augmented reality are kind of connected but different beasts. But they're both very interesting because, yeah, I imagine a world, and don't steal my ideas, people, because I might write a brilliant sci-fi novel about it if I
This is
learn to write.
this is all
But
copyrighted.
yeah, this is my pitch, right? This a world with kind of augmented neural networks and augmented, ocular drives, as it were, and auditory drives, and you literally see your reality around you augmented with certain things, like a price tag on something that you look at and a link to buy it immediately from your kind of frontal cortex or something. And living in virtual, you already see people like living in these internet worlds and stuff like that, but I think it's going to affect everything, even sexuality. I mean, like, why people aren't, men especially, once you invent the perfect sex robot, or you augment the neural networks and create augmented reality to such a point that they not imagine that they see a three-dimensional hard-bodied image in front of them, but they are seeing it via their ocular drives, and it's the perfect woman that they want, and the neural networks are such as to evoke all the kind of nervous feelings that you would, including orgasm and things like that. Then how are you going to get young boys out of the house to do anything? And this is the problem with all of kind of virtual reality, augmented reality, is like how and why should we get humans out of the house? Or are we just going to be an entirely conscious being, like with no physical thing, that we can just hardwire ourselves in and not bother living in the real world and just experience our 90 to 100 years of life by living in a halo of our own consciousness, dreaming constantly, experiencing maybe the highs and lows, but only according to the program that you allow.
There's an issue in Japan, especially, I think, with young men finding a partner, because they apparently really, they find it difficult to talk to women. I think The Economist was talking about this. Young people in Japan are having less sex than ever.
Yeah, I read that as well. That there's even a bit of a movement away from it. That they're just completely uninterested. But also, in the West, where, I mean, I was lucky enough to be born in the early 80s and kind of grow up without the internet, and I feel like that was important for me, and I'm glad I grew up like that. And all my family were older than me, and so I wasn't introduced to things. But studies show that boys now are having a real problem growing up with ubiquitous pornography and things like that, and it's not only rendering them kind of unable to find a healthy sexual partner in a normal way, but it's standing in their way of even conceptualizing sex in a healthy way, because they're introduced to it from such a young age. I mean, it's not finding a few ripped up pictures of Playboy at the bottom of the school field when you're 13 anymore. Right. It's going online and seeing things that to a young mind can not only be quite disturbing but addictive and confusing and unhealthy as well.
And then if your own reality of having a sexual experience isn't as good as you imagined it with watching these programs, then it switches you off from that reality.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the same with every kind of impulse and input. Again, back to the guy in the pub, this porn addicted Google freak.
But he's got the perfect pint though, so something's going right.
He has, but does he know he's drinking it? Is that just his augmented neural network telling him? I don't know. It's finding a place for humanity in a world where you've deliberately usurped humanity at every point, and this is the way that things are going. This is what people are pushing for, but I don't think anyone's quite stopping to think, oh my god, what's the end result here? Those who are get scoffed at and talked down. Even Elon Musk gets scoffed and talked down, because in a way he's wrong. Like, you can't legislate for something that doesn't exist yet. You might get it completely wrong, and it seems a bit silly, but I think his comments come from a genuine place that he can see this kind of avalanche of technology. And I didn't realise how fast things were going until I started working for RoboHub and reading everything that's coming in. And you're right with even driving. How many people are employed as drivers? I mean, India, did you see that they're banning self-driving cars? It'll put too many people out of work. And what are people going to do when they're out of work?
I suppose one of the underlying questions of this is, how do humans find meaning in a world that becomes dominated by these robotics?
Precisely, and I think the only meaning that there can be, the only way I could see it going in this kind of hypothetical, far in the future world where we, because all we need to really create, is one super intelligence. That's all we need, because once a super intelligence is created, it will be the difference between our intellect as humans and mice. We talk about Einstein, you put Einstein next to your average Big Brother contestant. You say, my God, look at the gap in intelligence there. But from a holistic point of view, there's no gap at all. There's virtually no gap in their DNA. What we're talking about with a super intelligence is once you create something smarter than the smartest human that's able to learn, it can then create beyond itself. You've created a god, and you're no longer in charge.
I'm sure Sorry, you go.
Oh no, I was getting carried away, frightening myself.
Well, I know, it's giving me shivers.
But there really is no need to worry just yet, people.
Just yet, you know.
But it's no harm in thinking, he said, as he put a shotgun in his mouth.
Yeah, I know the way Sam Harris described this. I was listening to him talk about artificial intelligence, and he said that it's almost as if, say we're having this conversation now, and you asked me quite a difficult question, say, about superintelligence, and I had to maybe go away, research it, come back to you maybe 2 days later. Say I actually had to go and read a book or something like that. But then if you've got the superintelligence that within a split second can almost do 100 years of research and processing, that's the terrifying bit, I suppose. Within a whole second, it's figured out thousands of years of what it would take a human to figure out.
Once this hypothetical superintelligence is created, its primary directive is likely to be just keep them going. Don't let them strain a muscle. Don't let them do everything for them. We can't even comprehend what an artificial superintelligence would be. Again, it's like the mouse trying to comprehend human consciousness. It's impossible. Nothing has been that intelligent. Nothing will be. We will be. Imagine if there was a god, that he wasn't omnipotent, that he was actually stupider than the first humans, you know what I mean? And then there was a kind of avalanche of human consciousness after that. Well, this is the scenario we're talking about.
I think this is the problem that Musk is having, is when do you draw the line, I suppose? Because there's so many small incremental steps that it just creeps up on you.
Yeah.
So Musk is obviously warning us about this, but the big question is, at what point do we say we can't go any further because the consequences are too great?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the superintelligence we're talking about, let's be frank, could be half a millennium away. We're not. We're nowhere near. Absolutely nowhere near. I don't think people really realise, on a science communication point of view, how rudimentary some of the artificial intelligence is that does absolutely brilliant jobs. And in a way, that's kind of heartening because, okay, well, it's just an algorithm and it doesn't do anything, really. It just does what it does. But then on the other hand, it does what it does extremely well from an extremely simple algorithm. And so it's difficult to not constantly wheel around to what if it's unbelievably complex beyond human comprehension. Then we can't even begin to wonder how powerful this thing could become. So you can't really legislate for what doesn't exist, but there has to be a way to keep people in the loop, all people, not just people who can write code or are good scientists, but people of every ilk. They need something to do. They need the good, the bad, they need all the things that make a human, because there's no psychological difference. Well, there's no evolutionary difference really between us and someone 90,000 years ago.
Well, Alex, this has been a fantastic conversation. I wish you all the best in your PhD and hopefully you come back on the podcast soon.
Thank you. I'd love to come back soon.
To keep up to date with the Tom Talks podcast, subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, follow on Twitter at Tom Talks Tweets, like our Facebook page, and visit thomaserandall.ca. For more of Alex Kirkpatrick, you can visit his personal website, superluminalpi.com, and follow him on Twitter at superluminalpi. Thank you to Alex for joining me for this podcast, and thanks to you, the listener, for your support.